Us. I'm Jenny Tutone. I'm the program director here at the Natural History Institute. And before I introduce tonight's speaker, I have a few quick announcements. First, the restrooms are right over on the other side of that wall, but you need to go through this hallway and keep turning to reach to them. Please leave all questions until the end. We'll have a Q&A after the presentation. And a reminder to silence your cell phones. And for the month of April, every dollar you donate will be doubled thanks to a generous $15,000 matching gift. You can donate online. We have cash boxes up front. We accept checks. And so utilize this until April 31st and help us reach our goal of $30,000. There are limited spots available for our exciting 5-day, 4-night adventure along the San Juan River. You'll get to explore the stunning landscapes of the Colorado Plateau with naturalist David Gilligan, expert river guides from Prescott College, and me. So if you're interested in going on this trip, come see me after the presentation. And if you're interested in exclusive field outings and discounts on paid programs, be sure to visit our membership table up front. By becoming a nature guardian or champion, you'll be invited to free member-only field excursions. This weekend we have one. We're going to explore Walnut Creek and Juniper Mesa Wilderness. So if you're interested in that, come see myself or Abigail after the presentation. And then I want to give a very big thank you to the Arizona Humanities and Finley Subaru of Prescott. They helped make this program possible and keep this presentation free. So please go visit Kara from Finley Subaru afterwards to see what's going on at our local Subaru. And she also has a car parked out up front that you are welcome to sit in and experience. So now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Maurice Crandall. Maurice Crandall is an associate professor of history at Arizona State University, an enrolled member of the Yavapai-Apache Nation. He previously taught at Dartmouth College. Professor Crandall is a multi-award-winning author and public intellectual who's presented his research throughout the United States as well as Canada and Europe. His first book, These People Have Always Been a Republic, Indigenous Electorates in the U.S. Mexico Borderlands, was published by the University of North Carolina Press in 2019. His second book on the Yavapai-Apache Scouts is under contract with Norton Company, and he also did a fabulous presentation here and at Ollie for us about the Yavapai-Apache Scouts. He received his PhD in history from the University of New Mexico and is a graduate just right over the hill from Mingus Union High School. So with that, please help me welcome Dr. Maurice Crandall with his talk, Demystifying Indian Gaming and Casinos, an Environmental, Economic, and Indigenous Perspective.
All right. Thank you for that introduction, and thanks to you all for being here. This is my first time giving a talk with a headset. I have to say that it's a little weird, but that's okay. I had to get the glasses on and this over it. And all that, but anyway, thank you all for being here this evening. I'm going to lead off with a disappointing bit of news for all of you. I do not have tips on how to win at gambling. Some wise guy always has a question at the end of the talk. You didn't tell us how to win. You tell me. I'd like to know. So this is my third time speaking through the Natural History Institute. Once here and once at the Yavapai College campus in Clarkdale, which is where I'm from. And if you've seen me give a talk before, some of this information will be repeated at the beginning, but I do this because I believe that if I'm putting myself up here as somebody with expertise, that I should show the receipts. So I want you to know that I know what I'm talking about, and not just claiming that I know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to give you my bona fides that are a little more rooted in place and community instead of just that I have a PhD. That's important, but there are other aspects that are important as well that relate to my background and my family. So as Jenny said, I'm a enrolled member with the Yavapai-Apache Nation. So if you know the area, there are 3 Yavapai tribes in Arizona, one in Fort McDowell, which is outside Phoenix, one here in Prescott, and then another in Camp Verde. The tribe in Camp Verde actually has 5 non-contiguous reservations, which are in Clarkdale, which is where I lived and primarily where a portion of my family lives. There's one in Middle Verde, there's one in Camp Verde, there's one in Rimrock, and there's one in Tunley. So those are the 5 reservation communities. They're all quite small. Total, we have only a few thousand acres of reservation land, so it's not a big reservation. Although we just completed a land deal with the Forest Service. I'm sure some of you heard the news about that, which will add several thousand acres to our land base and make our reservation more contiguous, although not completely contiguous. I'm going to start with a photo. This is a photograph of my family in Clarkdale during the early 1900s. In the far back on the right are my great-grandparents, Daisy and Henry Russell. Next to them, looking down, is my grandfather, Ned Russell, and then his siblings. Which, only one individual in this photo, the youngest daughter, is still alive today, and she's in her 90s. This is what a native family would have looked like in the early 20th century. I mean, you can see that these are not wealthy people. They're wearing work clothes. My great-grandpa Henry worked at the smelter in Clarkdale that smelted the copper ore that was taken from the mine in Jerome on Mingus Mountain. My grandfather Ned worked at the Clarkdale Clubhouse. If you know anything about sort of how that operation worked, Clarkdale was a company town, but it was a company town for white company workers. Indians lived on land that actually wasn't a reservation at that time. They lived in a couple of different camps around Clarkdale, and that's where my family lived. But my grandfather Ned, when he was young, worked at the Clarkdale Clubhouse, which was the clubhouse for white employees of the mine, as a pin setter. It had a bowling alley, and he set the pins. But the town itself was highly segregated. And it wasn't just Native people and white people, it was also Mexican Americans. And the lower part of Clarkdale was called Patio Town, because that's where the Mexican American community was. So that's just a little bit of background about that community, about my family. I was particularly close with my grandpa Ned. This is him playing football for Clarkdale High School. Clearly, they didn't know about traumatic brain injuries at that time. You can see the helmet, almost non-existent. And then this is him when he was older. He went to World War II, fought for the Marine Corps in the Pacific, was wounded. He actually went before he had finished high school. He was only 17 when he got into the Marine Corps. And then when he came home, he finished high school, 2 years of high school in 1 year. And this is him wearing I wish I had a t-shirt. This is Clarkdale High School. The Clarkdale Wolves was the name. And there was another high school in Jerome. Anybody know what the Jerome mascot was? They were the Jerome Muckers. No joke. Mucker is a type of equipment. My grandpa told me, that it was very easy to make up chants about their main rival, Jerome High School, which I won't say. As I said, my grandfather was one of, he was a schoolmate of Ira Hayes at the Phoenix Indian School. They knew each other, and they met up again in the Pacific, both in the Marine Corps. And there, right across the street, is my grandfather's name, Ned Russell, on that Yavapai County service flag plaque that has the names of service members who came from Yavapai County, but there he is there. In addition to that, my family has been very involved in tribal leadership over the years. Grandpa Ned was tribal chairman for a time. This is his, tribal chair type picture. And then my mom, his daughter, was our chairwoman. for a time. And then in addition, my uncle, some of you may have known Vince Randall. He gave a lot of cultural talks around the Verde Valley and in Arizona. This is him. He just recently passed away. He was also our Apache culture director for a time. He's giving a talk in this photo here at the Clarkdale Clubhouse. You can see they still host talks sometimes, and there he is giving a talk. Again, I'm sharing these things with you to sort of give you my local bona fides so that you know I'm not some interloper claiming to know something. And maybe I don't know anything, but this is all just to say that I have a personal stake in this stuff. I'm talking about my own family, my own history, my own community. I care a lot about my tribe and the history of Central Arizona in particular, history of the Verde Valley. Even though I went to Mingus, you can still like me. We played Prescott, I played sports, and we were always over here. But I've spent a lot of time, I'm a historian by training, and as much as I learned in history classes, and having a PhD in history, I've learned as much or more spending a lot of time with people like this, spending time with my uncle, spending time with my grandparents, listening from a very young age to what they had to say. I remember driving with my grandpa Ned to Prescott. We'd go over the mountain, as we would say, because he had to go to VA appointments, and the VA was here in Prescott, so we spent a lot of time on those drives. I remember when I was young, he told me, this is the first time I'd ever heard it, I was a little kid, and he said, "You're gonna ride shotgun." And I hadn't heard that saying, and I thought I was gonna get to shoot a shotgun. So we got back close to home and pulling down that dirt road that goes to their house, and I was real disappointed. "What's wrong?" And I said, "When am I going to get to shoot the shotgun?" And he said, "Oh, no, that's riding shotgun." Still, he had a 22 pistol under the seat in his truck, and we pulled over, and it's dirt road, and just shot right there. So I did get to shoot a gun, but not the shotgun. So that's kind of my personal background in a nutshell. So I know you're all here to hear about Indian gaming. One of the most important developments in Indian country, as we would call it, this broader community of Native American people in the United States, perhaps the most important thing to happen to Native communities in the last 50 years or so, has touched many, many Native communities. And this is a little bit interactive. You can respond when I ask something. The first thing that I want to ask is, does anybody think gambling is a traditional indigenous activity? Does anybody think that? You think so? Yeah. Can you give me a example of maybe something you know? Anybody brave enough? Yeah. Okay. So there are various types of indigenous games of chance. Sometimes there's a moccasin game where you hide a bead or a stone inside a moccasin, and then you have to try to choose which one it's at. Stick game. Apaches in particular play Apache card game, which there were games of chance that were indigenous that predated colonization, but then there were adaptations to new things that were brought by outsiders. For example, this is an Apache deck of playing cards, and you can see the suits have been changed so that they represent cultural symbols that have relevance to Apache peoples. So instead of a knight, you would have an Apache person on horseback, and different types of symbolism. Here you have a corn stalk, just that they have been adapted, and these are on animal hides. We had a set of Apache playing cards at our casino that walked out the door. Somebody stole them. So if you've ever, they were priceless. They were from probably the 1700s or before. So if you ever come across somebody at a trade shop here in town and they have a set of Apache playing cards, you might just say, "Oh, where'd these come from?" If their story sounds sketchy, then get in touch with me. We'll figure it out. Also, this photograph that I showed of my uncle, what he's doing here is dealing cards. This was us playing Apache card game. you use the Mexican deck of cards where the suits are a little bit different, but there's a card game that Apache people love playing. That was introduced by Spaniards in the Southwest, beginning in the 1600s. But this is just to say that I think that there's no society in the world that hasn't had some form of gambling. People like to gamble. They just do. Maybe you don't like to gamble, but chances are somebody within a society or community will like to gamble. And so this is the first point that I want to make, is that to say gambling is not traditional for Native people. Casinos are not traditional. I would say that that's false. We've always had games of chance. We've always enjoyed gambling from the earliest accounts. And so some people might go further and say, well, okay, but gambling on a large scale is not traditional. That is not, that is in accordance with indigenous ways. And again, I would disagree with you. We know from very early accounts from French Jesuits or French fur traders where games of lacrosse took place. You might know that lacrosse is an indigenous game. It's tribes call it the creator's game. They believe that it was given by the creator as a way to settle disputes between communities and also as a substitute for war. And in historic times, when communities were in some kind of dispute that might turn to bloodshed, they sometimes would resort to playing a game of lacrosse instead. And so you avoided the mass violence, although the indigenous form of lacrosse was much more violent and rough than today's. And sometimes lacrosse games would last 3 days on fields that were as much as a mile long. So it was a different form of game, but you can see the sheer number of players in this painting. This is a Catlin painting. George Catlin, the famous painter. This is scores of people all going for the ball. But there's one, and there are a few depictions from that time, 17th century, 18th century, that show one particular aspect of lacrosse, and that is that they had the wagers placed on the games on a community scale, and many people attested to this who went and observed these games. They would lay out blankets and people would bring tons of items, community goods, and to the extent that they would almost bet like the entire goods of the community on a game. And the idea was, look, since we're communitarian and we sort of share things and have things in common, if we lose today, it will even out eventually and things will be all right. And so large amounts of community goods were often wagered on lacrosse games, and they became, this huge community event. But this was betting, this was gambling on a large scale, not just a little game, but a card game between a couple people, but on a large community scale. So Native peoples have enjoyed games of chance both on a smaller scale and on a larger community scale historically. You had a comment? No. Not typically. No. Typically, it was a men's game. They were involved in various aspects of the game. I've actually taught a course, Native Americans in Sports, and lacrosse is one of the games that we look at in detail. But it was more of a men's game, although there were games where women would play with each other. But usually, it was segregated by gender. Anyway, this is very interesting, but my talk is not about lacrosse. I'm going to transition now and go very far forward from this to what I really want to talk about, which is Indian gaming. But I want to talk about the economic aspect of it and the environmental aspect and weave those into this discussion. Does this look like a place where you would want to go? Does this look like a nice place? Yeah. It looks like a nice mountain scene. You've got some meadows. You've got trees, lots of green. This could be someplace nearby. I mean, this isn't that far removed from parts of Arizona that are mountainous and look really nice like this. The reason I put this photo up is that when we start thinking about the 20th century and Native peoples, in the 1950s, 1960s, through the 70s, there were not a lot of options for tribes to develop their economies. Most money that came into tribal communities came from federal appropriations. some form of federal assistance programs like housing and urban development, or President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs would bring monies into tribal communities. And those funds often would only cover a part of a tribe's needs for a year, for a fiscal year. And then you would have to go sometimes before Congress and ask for more appropriations each year. And then it was decided how much money a tribe would receive. And those covered pretty much everything: running tribal programs, housing, government, services to tribal members, infrastructure, etc. And it was not uncommon that a tribe would run out of money before the year was over. And when that happened, they would basically sort of shutter the operation and wait until the next round of appropriations came. And that could make life difficult for tribal members who relied on that type of government money and assistance coming into those communities. My grandpa told me that this happened with our tribe, that there were times when there just wasn't enough money left in the budget, and they would basically, tighten the belt and make do without any money for sometimes months at a time. So the reason that I put this photo up is during the 1950s or 60s, let's say, there were limited options for generating revenue, but there were some tribes that were fortunate enough to be located in places that look like this. This is actually an image of the Mescalero-Apache tribal homelands in New Mexico. If anyone's been to Ruidoso in that area, although there were fires recently that burned some of that, but it's mountainous, it's beautiful, it's attractive to tourists, and people go there. So some tribes started to develop tourism ventures, but you had to be in a place like this, and fortunate enough to be located in a place where people would want to go. So the Mescalero-Apache tribe, for example, they developed a tourism economy based around hiking, outdoor recreation, under the leadership of who was really a visionary. Their tribal chairman, his name was Wendell Chino. He was tribal chairman for several decades. They opened Ski Apache in 1963. Anyone been to Ski Apache? It's a nice ski resort, a nice facility. They've developed it more over the years. It was sort of small scale at the beginning, but they built it over time from the early 60s. And then they opened Inn of the Mountain Gods Resort in 1975. Some of you may have stayed there. I've stayed there. It's a very nice facility. They're still open today. They generate a large revenue for the tribe. The issue is that not all reservations are in places that attract tourists. Reservation communities are typically remote. They're typically on lands that were deemed undesirable by the federal government and intentionally given to tribal communities because they were viewed as undesirable. And then if they ever found out that there were desirable things there, they would take lands away from those reservations and make them smaller. And so during the mid-1900s, as I said, with limited opportunities, many tribes turned to other sources of income. The biggest of those was resource extraction. Tribes engaged in the energy industry. This included coal, oil, natural gas, and uranium. Those are sort of the main extractive industries that touched Native American communities. These can be a good source of revenue, but they come, as you all are aware, they come with many problems associated with them. Resource extraction in general, it's destructive. It brings in elements, both environmental and in terms of developing the industry itself and the people associated with it that aren't always positive. When it was discovered that the Osage Nation of Oklahoma had huge oil reserves under their reservation, it began a chain of events that led to, if anyone's seen, what's it called? I think I have it written down. Killers of the Flower Moon. It's a true story. What happened is once word got out that there was huge oil wealth under that reservation and in the land, groups of dishonest, in some cases just downright terrible outsiders came in and tried to worm their way into the tribe. They sometimes intermarried with tribal women, tribal members, and then tried to get access to that oil. And in the case of the Osages, there were a number of murders. People were shot, people were bombed, blown up, and through these murders, some non-tribal members gained access to that oil wealth. And so this is an example of how something that appears it will be beneficial to the tribe and bring in revenue, bring in economic development, can lead to not just environmental destruction, but also, you know, the very lives of tribal members being harmed. Still, with limited options, a lot of tribes turned to resource extraction, things like coal and uranium. These were ways to generate money for the economies and for tribal members. Uranium in particular, during the mid-20th century, was needed for the atomic age, for weapons and energy generating. This was during the height of the Cold War. There was a huge demand for these types of things to build bombs and to generate atomic energy. And so there was a period where you had the uranium frontier. This is an actual poster from that time. And you see the, you know, he looks like a prospector from the 19th century, but instead he's got a Geiger counter. And that is the uranium frontier. And the uranium frontier was mainly in the Four Corners area, smack dab in the middle of Navajo and Hopi homelands of a number of tribal nations in that area. And so lands were opened up to uranium extraction. And a lot of tribes got involved in this. Between 1953 and 1982, for example, the Anaconda Minerals Company leased land from, and we still hear about Anaconda, they're still around. They leased land from Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico, near the village of Powati. It's not on this map, but it would be sort of just a little bit east of here. And if you've gone on that stretch from I-40 when you're east or west of Albuquerque, you drive through Laguna Pueblo and you can stop there and see, you know, it's a beautiful historic community. But they were involved in uranium extraction. And so tribes there was a federal set of legal apparatus whereby tribes could lease their land to resource extraction companies. They often didn't do it themselves. They leased the rights to outside entities who then paid royalties to the tribes. And so this was one example. Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico leased the land to Anaconda. And they operated what was called the Yavapai-Apache uranium mine. It was the world's largest open pit uranium mine at that time. It was in operation for 29 years, and about 400 million tons of rocks were moved within the mine area, and about 25 million tons of uranium ore were transported via the Santa Fe Railroad from the mine to the Blue Water Mill, which is down the road farther west, about 40 miles west of there. At its height, that mine employed 650 workers, most of them from Laguna and Acoma Pueblos. Laguna Pueblo did make a decent amount of money from the jackpile operation, and it provided steady wage work to tribal members. This was how, you know, it could be justified to engage in that type of thing. But the costs, if you look on the cost side, they were astronomical. The mine severely contaminated the village's water supply, and the yellow powder from the uranium mining blew all over the surrounding villages. It was inhaled by children, by the elderly, animals. The operation also harmed the agricultural tradition of the village because it contaminated the soil and the crops. People ate the food that came from the ground that was contaminated with the yellow powder. When Anaconda pulled out of the operation in 1982, they left the tribe with a gigantic crater, actually a series of craters dug out of their land, huge piles of radioactive slag. With rain and wind over time, those slag heaps, they move, they leach into the ground, they leach into the streams and the water. They make their way, in this case, into the Rio Grande, which is sort of the lifeblood of the Southwest. And this is what happens with resource extraction. This is one of the reasons it's so problematic. Just on a sort of personal aside, anybody been to Clarkdale and seen the slag heap there? This is the photo I took. That's the slag heap. That big black monstrosity. Look at the buildings. Those are pretty large buildings. It's huge. And there it sits leaching into the Verde River, contaminating the land for decades. It's right by the Verde, and you cannot, it gets into the water there, and there's a slag heap in Cottonwood, and they've been debating, what do we do about it? And they've tried to blow it up into smaller pieces so that then they can take it away, because once the slag heap hardens, it's the tailings from mining. Once you go through the process of refining, and it's this huge process that produces lots of contaminants, the leftover is put on a slag heap, but once it hardens, it's really hard to get rid of. What do you do with a slag heap? So imagine giant radioactive slag heaps of old uranium tailings. But there's very limited options about what to do about that, and so it continues to contaminate for decades and decades. Navajos in particular suffered from uranium mining operations as well. Navajo uranium miners were never told of the dangers of the occupation. What regulations did exist were rarely, if ever, enforced. Miners pulled uranium ore from the ground by hand. Many didn't wear any protective equipment, no masks. If they did, I've heard stories of the uranium miners. They would put a handkerchief dipped in water and tie it around their face, bandito style. That was it. That was the extent of the protective equipment. And then they would go home to their families wearing contaminated clothing with radioactive powder in their hair, their eyes, on their skin, on their clothes. Many Navajo uranium miners lived in hogans without running water, where you share hauled water that's brought from a water source, and everybody in the family uses the same thing, so they're washing in that water. The uranium powder gets into everybody's food, onto their skin, they drink it. Many Navajo and Pueblo uranium miners contracted lung cancer and other respiratory ailments. If you drive through that corridor of country, chances are you will see one of those billboards about class action suits against the uranium mining companies because they have caused so much physical damage. And those operations left more than 1,000 abandoned uranium mines on the Navajo Nation. Four former uranium mills. In July of 1979, the dam in Church Rock, New Mexico, just outside the Navajo Reservation. Anyone hear about Church Rock and know what happened there? The dam held the reservoir, which is where the radioactive tailings from that uranium mining operation regionally were held. That dam broke, and the sludge and water flooded onto, it was just outside the reservation, but the water and the broken dam flowed onto reservation. It went into the Rio Puerco, and 100 million gallons of radioactive sludge eventually contaminated 80 miles of riverbed, along with the surrounding land, groundwater, and the air. 1,000 sheep died in this disaster. If you know anything about Navajo culture, you know how important sheep are to their communities, and it's still not cleaned up. They still haven't fully addressed, because what can you do about it? How can you reclaim land where something like that has happened? And to this day, it remains one of the forgotten nuclear disasters in American history, because largely, I would contend, Native peoples are expendable in the United States. And so a radioactive disaster in a place like New Jersey is going to get lots of attention, but in rural Navajo, New Mexico, it's not. Both the Navajo Nation and Hopi tribe engaged in coal extraction for decades. Anyone been to Black Mesa? Know about Black Mesa? Companies like the Peabody Coal Company leased the land and paid royalties to the tribal members. Like I said, this was how it worked. Coal was extracted, but the manner in which it was done is incredibly destructive and dangerous. It's a fairly complex story, and I don't want to go into all the details about it, but just to say that between 1964, when the Navajo Nation signed a lease to mine Black Mesa Plateau, and up to just a few years ago, the Hopi tribe was involved as well. They signed leases with various companies. These companies engaged in extensive, comprehensive strip mining, and it leaves the land looking like this. Huge dragline excavators tear through the ground, they uncover the coal deposits, and then that coal is placed on a slurry of water, which carries it to the place where it can then be transported. There's also a conveyor at one spot where the coal is put onto the conveyor, and then it's brought to silos, and then it's either brought by train or truck to other places. And what it does to water is really interesting, because like I said, much of that coal initially is transported through a slurry, and that water has to come from somewhere. And so they pumped the aquifer. Peabody pumped an average of 3 million gallons of Navajo water per day. So think about decades of that and how it depleted the water table. The Kayenta mine, that's where the conveyor was. It's a 17-mile long conveyor belt that brought the coal to a huge silo, and then it was loaded onto rail cars and brought to the Navajo generating station. This coal was for generating electricity. That's what they used it for. And where do you think that electricity went? To the Navajo Nation? No, it went to Las Vegas and Phoenix and western cities, Los Angeles. So the reason that I bring all of this up and what it has to do with gaming is that in a pre-casino era, these were your options. These were among the few options for developing a tribal economy. They were incredibly destructive economically, culturally, physically. They caused disease, cancer, all kinds of ailments. If you were lucky enough to be in a place that could attract tourism, then you could engage in that. Lots of Native peoples did sort of household craft industries where they would, make crafts to sell, but there's not a lot of money in that. It's it doesn't produce a lot of capital. And so you need to understand this before you can understand Indian gaming. This is the context in which it emerges. So in the 1970s, the federal government began to initiate what was known as the policy of self-determination. And this was a shift actually during the Nixon presidency. A lot of people aren't aware that Nixon was actually very amenable, relatively speaking, to Indian affairs and policies that might benefit tribes. And he, in 1970, gave a speech that now is very famous. It was called the Special Message to Congress on Indian Affairs. And he said some things that a president had never said previously. He said, "The first Americans, the Indians, are the most deprived and most isolated minority group in our nation. On virtually every scale of measurement, employment, income, education, health, the condition of the Indian people ranks at the bottom. This condition is the heritage of centuries of injustice. From the time of their first contact with European settlers, the American Indians have been oppressed and brutalized, deprived of their ancestral lands, and denied the opportunity to control their own destiny. Even the federal programs, which I mentioned, which are intended to meet their needs, have frequently proven to be ineffective and demeaning." You won't hear a president saying this now in these types of words. And that's not to say that Nixon was perfect on Indian affairs, but this acknowledgement that what was available for Native peoples was not adequate and that they had suffered long enough. He said, "It's long past time that the Indian policies of the federal government began to recognize and build upon the capacities and insights of the Indian people." And so he committed himself to this policy of self-determination. And this is the idea that tribes should have a say in becoming economically, culturally self-sufficient, that they should determine their own future, that they should find ways, if possible, to develop their economies. Unfortunately, a lot of the focus was still on energy resource extraction, oil and gas and uranium. But those aren't possible for all tribes, just like tourism isn't possible for all tribes. You might not have the land base to develop those types of things, or they might not exist there. My tribe, for example, we don't have coal, we don't have uranium. Our ancestral lands is where the copper was, but that's not on our reservation now. That land was taken away. So in the late 1970s through the early 1980s, a handful of tribes started operating high-stakes bingo games. They saw a need, they saw a desire that outsiders had, and they started operating their own bingo parlors. The Seminole tribe of Florida, for example, held bingo games 6 days a week that offered much larger pots than other bingo parlors, which were very much, sort of like the what you would imagine the senior centers where bingo bingo, and you win $5 or whatever. These were not that. These were larger scale operations. 6 days a week, hundreds to thousands of dollar payouts, and so people started flocking there. Busloads of people would be brought into these operations. State law in Florida was that you could only pay, or you could only operate 2 days a week with a pot of $100 maximum. But if you know anything about reservations, state law largely does not apply. And so the Seminole bingo parlors, like I said, opened 6 days a week with huge, relatively speaking, payouts. And so they became extremely popular. In California, the Cabazon Band of Mission Indians and the neighboring Morongo Reservation began operating high-stakes bingo games as well, and they also added poker tables around 1980. Both Cabazon and Morongo had the advantage of being close to Palm Springs, and so people with money were nearby, and they came and they started to gamble. Now, these were relatively small operations. Cabazon and Morongo opened operations that were not like Las Vegas-style casinos today. But what they did was bring not just people who wanted to gamble for higher stakes, but they brought the ire of law enforcement. And California shut down their casino. So the tribe fought against them. It was litigated, went to court, made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reached a decision in 1987, which was the State of California versus Cabazon Band of Mission Indians, and Cabazon won. So the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Cabazon, stating that if gambling was not criminally prohibited in a state, then it was legal for Indians to operate casinos and have gaming. So if a state had anything like a lottery, scratchers, that's gambling, and it's legal. And so a tribe in any state where gambling is legal, a federally recognized tribe, could operate gaming ventures. So this is a huge victory for Native people. It opened the door to gambling, but the federal government also decided that there needed to be some form of regulation. It had to be regulated in some way. And so in short order, after Cabazon, Congress passed what's known as the IGRA, Indian Gaming and Regulatory Act. And this is the legal framework still today that oversees Indian gaming. It divides gaming into 3 classes. Class 1 is traditional games, games of chance, games played at a social or ceremonial gathering for small prizes or small stakes. That's not regulated under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. Class 2 includes games like bingo, pull tabs, punch boards, non-banked card games. So you're playing only against other people. There's no house money involved. Those are also not regulated. You can have Class 2 gaming. It's not regulated by the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. Class 3 is what we're talking about today. Casino-style gaming, slot machines, blackjack, roulette, where the big money is, where the high rollers are gambling. And the simplest way to explain how this works is that federally recognized tribes can operate Class 3 gaming as long as legal gambling exists within the state where the reservation is located. But then they also have to negotiate a compact with the state government that sets the terms, the regulations and guidelines that oversee gambling for that tribe and its casino. And that's done with the governor of the state. It's done on a state level. And then once that compact has been negotiated, it's signed and approved by the Secretary of the Interior, because Indian Affairs are overseen by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is housed within the Interior Department. In order to have a compact and to have a gaming operation, tribes have to have some sort of tribal gaming authority in place, and the infrastructure and tribal oversight of casino activities all in place. I couldn't decide, because I'm a tribal member, that I'm going to open a casino in my living room and have some slot machines in there and you can all come and gamble. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's all very regulated, and it has to be done through a compact. Another important thing to note is that states are required to enter into compact negotiations with tribes. It has to be done, and it's supposed to be done in good faith. But it has happened many times that states decide they don't want to do it, even though they're legally obligated to do so. It happened in Arizona with Fife Symington when he was governor. He didn't want to negotiate gaming compacts with tribes. Fort McDowell said, fine, we'll do it without a compact, and they went ahead. They called in the feds and law enforcement and came and tried to haul the machines away. At Fort McDowell, they got on the phone and said, everybody come down here. And this is in the early 90s. And they circled the wagons, as it were, circled the trucks, and it looked like it was going to be an armed standoff there at Fort McDowell outside Phoenix. Eventually, Fife Symington stood down because he knew he was wrong, and negotiated a compact with them. They were the first, and that opened the door to gaming in Arizona. So gaming is a huge boon to tribes. Since its passage, it has extended to roughly 250 tribes across 29 states. It's not everywhere, but it's in many places. The financial year 2024 brought more than $42 billion in Indian gaming revenue. That sounds like a lot, but relatively speaking, $24 billion. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, but it's not, massive, and not everyone is getting rich by it. If you think about it this way, there are 574 federally recognized tribes. Only around 250 operate casinos, so that's less than half. And I say roughly 250 because sometimes tribes open ventures, they don't work, they don't generate money, and they have to shut down. Not everyone's getting rich off of it. Some have historically. This is Foxwoods. Has anyone been to Foxwoods in Connecticut? This is operated by the Mashantucket Pequot tribe. There's also Mohegan Sun. I've been to both. These are huge resort-type facilities with hotels, shopping malls, indoor shops, all the amenities. They're fortunate to be located on that corridor sort of between like New York and Boston and Washington, D.C., within that travel triangle. And so they get a lot of people who come to gamble. But they also expanded too much and didn't have the capital to back it up. And for a time, they had to shut down a lot of their operations. They're back on solid footing, but they took a big hit during 2007, 2008 financial crisis. So tribes aren't immune to those types of market downturns. Tribes use the money generated from casino revenues typically to fund tribal operations, housing, social services, services to elders. For example, in our tribe, they pay the utility bills of elders. Higher education, it funded my higher education. I got a PhD debt-free because we had a tribal scholarship, which I am forever grateful for. I don't have student loans to pay back. They provide jobs for tribal members, money for cultural preservation, language programs, classes, all types of things. But perhaps the one most people are most interested in is per capita payments, payouts to tribal members individually. Yes, that happens as well. Per caps is what we call them. But that's a complicated and divisive issue. Places like Foxwoods, when they were at their height, they were paying per caps in the hundreds of thousands per year. Each tribal member was getting a huge amount of money. For a time, this was the richest community in the United States per capita. But then, like I said, they had some financial troubles, and it's not on the same level as it was. In our tribe, we get per capita payments, but it depends year to year on what the revenues are, but they're usually around $1,200 to $1,500 total in a year's time. So, $100 a month. It's not a lot of money. We're not getting rich off of that. The benefits are in other areas. There have been some tribes famously opposed to Indian gaming. Navajo Nation opposed gaming for many years, did not want it on their reservation. It failed to pass national referenda. Then it did pass, and now Navajos have Fire Rock Casino near Gallup. They have Twin Arrows just outside Flagstaff. Flowing Water Casino, which is near Shiprock, and Northern Edge Casino near Farmington. Some of the opposition to gaming has come from both outsiders and within the communities. One of the biggest oppositions to gaming historically has been its connection to organized crime. that Las Vegas and Atlantic City are tied to the mob. And so when Indian gaming became a possibility for tribes, there were people who said, well, the mob is going to come into these reservations and control the community. And that has not panned out. I've not heard of any concrete shoes in our tribe or Jimmy Hoffa type stuff. It's just, it hasn't happened. We're too small and outside of their view. Tribal casinos have brought, though, things like increased vice to some extent and problem gaming. This is the Buc-ee's Casino webpage. If you go, I just got onto it yesterday and took a screenshot. If you go down to the bottom here, must be 21 or older, problem gambling, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. So problem gaming, both for tribal members who frequent the casino and outsiders who come there. This is an issue, of course. Many non-native people, but also native people who are cash-strapped and living in economically depressed conditions, gambling preys upon those people because if your life is hard, you're hoping for a payout and the promise of some sort of immediate big win. And I worked at my tribe's casino at Cliff Castle, and I remember seeing native people there who I did not have the money to gamble the amount that they were, and it was sad because I know that they're struggling and gambling money that you don't have. It disproportionately affects poorer people. On the positive side, though, Indian gaming has been a rallying point for a lot of tribes. They've joined together to support and promote it as an industry. There's the National Indian Gaming Association, which seeks to protect and promote Indian gaming in a responsible way. They have lobbyists in Washington, D.C., because like I said, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It certainly is the main economic driver for my tribe. It makes the most revenue of all of our other ventures. And there are challenges with diversification. Tribes should be diversifying and using casino revenue to get into other operations and ways of diversifying their economies, but that isn't always the case, and it depends on a tribe-by-tribe basis. So I'm gonna end here. I know I've gone long, but is that okay? I'll end soon. Yeah, okay. A little bit on Cliff Castle Casino. This is our casino. This is an older photo that was taken before we had the addition now, which is the hotel, which is now, it looks like this, the larger hotel that adjoins it. There's the casino. So this was from the olden times. But how many of you went to the olden times? Anybody go to the first casino? Where was it?
Oh, down along the highway there.
In the motel.
In the motel. Yeah.
In the motel. So again, when our tribe was looking for ways to develop our economy, one of the options was opening a tribal motel, and we did that in the 1980s. We're on that I-17 corridor between Flagstaff and Phoenix, and so we get some foot traffic, people who maybe don't want to stay in Sedona and pay the higher hotels, stay in a tribal motel that's cheaper and you're sort of close to the stuff. But nobody was getting rich off of that. It was generating some revenue, but not a lot. And we had some other ventures. We tried some other things, but really there wasn't anything that was really making a lot of money. And my grandfather and my auntie were both on tribal council in the early 1990s when the possibility of Indian gaming came around. And I was a kid at the time, and I remember these conversations. We were debating as a tribe whether we should do it. There were people who were opposed to casinos, some on sort of moral and religious grounds that gambling is just bad. It's an immoral activity. Other people, again, maybe afraid by these ideas of increased crime, criminality, and vice, and prostitution, and the like. And so we were having these debates within our community. And another thing about it is that casinos require huge amounts of startup capital. To have an operation that looks like this, you need to have millions of dollars. And when a tribe doesn't have that, you got to go out and get a loan. And so an industry developed around corporations that funded tribal casinos. And so my grandfather and my auntie, who were on council at the time, they were hesitant. They were not sold on the idea of a casino for the tribe. But a group of representatives from Fitzgerald's, which was a Reno-based operation at that time, it's not in business anymore, but they got involved in tribal casino development, and they came and they did a presentation to our tribal council. And they said, this is what we can help you with. We'll help you develop the infrastructure. We have the know-how. We can make the loan, et cetera, et cetera. And my family was sold on it after that presentation. They said, okay, this is something that we can do. This is feasible. As a tribe, we were very deliberate about it, and we paid back our loan as soon as we could. We didn't want to carry that debt for a long time. And the other decision we made was that we were not going to build a building standalone from the beginning. We were going to have a casino in the structures that we already had, which was the motel. So the first casino was in the motel lobby. We moved in a couple hundred machines and some tables, and that's where it was. I worked there when I was a teenager, 19, 18 years old. I worked there for a while, and I was the mobile cage. The cage is where you go to cash out and get your money. It's called the cage because often it has bars, and then the little window. At that time, this is before club cards. Now you get a club card. It has all your credits on it. You plug it into the machine. You don't even really have to pull the one-armed bandit anymore. But back then, machines ran on money. There were no club cards, and so you had to put dollars in, and that's why there were those little dirty buckets everywhere. When you cashed out and wanted to go to a different machine, you put the bucket under, you cashed out, and all the coins dropped out, and then you moved to the other machine. And so my job was, if people wanted change for 100, I pushed the little cart, I unlocked it, I had a little stash of money, and they'd say, give me 20s, and I'd give them 20s, and then close it up. And then I did basic customer service stuff. I brought Diet Cokes to little old ladies who were gambling. And I made a certain amount of money, but I also made tips, which was my main source of income, because the machines, at that time, like I said, everything was money-based. There was coin. If you won a jackpot, let's say it's $1,000, a machine could only hold $250 in quarters or whatever. And so the rest had to be paid by hand. And so I would go to the main cage with the ticket from the machine saying how much needed to be paid off, and those tribal gaming officers, the guys in the white shirts with the earpieces, would watch me and walk next to me. And then give them the ticket, they'd give me the stack of bills, and I'd carry it back and I'd pay out the jackpot winner. And I was younger and maybe decent looking, and I was good at what I did and nice, and so they whatever bill was on top, maybe they just give you a tip, $50 right there. You just paid someone's jackpot. And so there were nights when I walked out of there with $300 in my pocket in tips, and we didn't tip share, and so man, I was rolling at that time. Now, that has all changed, and because we were wise with our investment, we paid off our loan, and then we expanded. This opened around 1999, 2000, and then the hotel expansion was a few years back. It was actually during my mom's term as tribal chairwoman, and that operation is thriving, and then, like I said, it has paid off lots of dividends to our community, both in terms of housing, education, social services, cultural programming. The benefits far, far, far outweigh the drawbacks. And I would say, if anyone asks me, has gaming been good for Indian country? I can speak to my own community. I would say overwhelmingly yes, it has. Like I said, I got a PhD with no student debt, and that wouldn't have been possible likely without our gaming revenues, which then fund higher education. There are some negative consequences. I have to say I'm sad when I hear about gambling addictions, but the positives outweigh the negatives. And actually, I just got my per cap check this week. I had to go. It comes by registered mail, and you can pick it up at the tribal admin building, or you can wait for it to be mailed. And I just got mine this week. It was for $779.56. But like I said, the biggest benefits have been in other areas. Healthcare. We have a health clinic on our reservation, and tribal members can go for basic care or get a referral for more comprehensive care. It has funded our tribal government so it doesn't have to shut down 9 months into the year. I remember very vividly as a child when I'd go to tribal council meetings with my grandfather, and the tribal council met in a double wide. It was a trailer used for council meetings, and my grandpa would say, go sit in the corner over there, we got business, and I would just sit there. I don't know what I would do. I didn't have devices at the time. I was probably drawing or daydreaming, I don't know. But this is what Indian gaming has looked like for us. Looking to the future, we hope that it will still provide a reliable source of revenue so that we can continue to thrive as a community. And I hope that this has given you a little more insight into the history of Indian gaming, the economic and environmental conditions that predated it, the history of gambling within Native communities. All of these are intertwined. They're all part of the same story. And I'm happy to answer any questions now that you might have. Thank you very much. There you go.
I'd like to know, excuse me, if the tribe can buy property outside of the reservation and put up a casino. I believe there's some sort of controversy about that.
Yeah, so the question is whether a tribe can buy land outside of the reservation and start a casino. Again, this is, okay, so I'm going to have to give you Indian land basics like 101. So reservations are trust land. Reservations are not, they are not owned by the tribes outright. We don't have fee simple title. When a tribe buys land outside of the reservation, a casino has to be on trust land, and so you would have to go through a process of turning that land into trust, which is something that's done through the federal government, through the Interior Department, and then it becomes trust land. That land that we just completed our land exchange has not been switched to trust land yet. And so we need to get that done because we're paying the property taxes on it. Trust land is not taxed. There's no property tax on trust land. That is federal government. Yeah. Sorry, I gotta adjust this thing. It's kind of. I'm gonna do this for a minute. There we go. That's better. It's kind of squeezing my head. Felt my Mars Attacks head coming up. Okay, so if a tribe in one place bought land in another place and succeeded in turning that into trust land, could it then be a casino opened there? Possibly, but there would probably be opposition. Hopi tribe, for example, has land in Clarkdale, and they just opened that, I forget what it's called, right there by Tuzigoot. At the turnoff, there's a new sort of resort there. It's not huge, but it's nice. That's, the Hopi tribe owns that, but it's not trust land. So they couldn't have a reservation. They couldn't have a casino there because it's not trust land. They own that property outright. Yeah, but good question, and it's complicated, but that whole process of trust land, yeah.
So there was just an announcement.
Oh, we have
an announcement recently in the Hopi Navajo Observer that the Navajo have purchased what used to be called the Museum Club in Flagstaff, and it is going to be put onto the reservation, and
Right.
they're going to have a casino there.
Right.
Right in town.
Okay, so if you think about it, Flagstaff is traditional indigenous land, and the Navajo Reservation goes almost to the city limits. I mean, you leave Flagstaff and head north, and you'll be on reservation in short order. And so in that case, it's not really a stretch, but it makes sense in terms of sort of the greater homelands and its location. But let's say that a tribe in northern Arizona buys land outside Tucson and says, we want to start a casino there. That's where it gets trickier. And that's where questions of sort of your Aboriginal homeland, is it within your larger Aboriginal domain? And then what about the tribes that are there? You know, because outside Tucson, you know, there was controversy over the Thanatams who opened the casino in Glendale. And that was through a deal they had land at Gila Bend that flooded and it wasn't inhabitable, and so they were given some land at the time in unincorporated Maricopa County, and they chose that piece of land, not knowing that it would become the entertainment center where all of the stadiums would be and all of that tourism industry. But they were not. They made an agreement that they wouldn't open a casino there, and then when the time came, they decided that they wanted to go forward with that. And in the end, that was their land, and it's trust land, and they succeeded in opening a casino there. But it was controversial, and a lot of the Arizona tribes were against it because it meant more competition for them. You know, when you're not the only game in town. I remember before Twin Arrows opened, we were sort of the only game in northern Arizona, and we would get people from the region who would come to Cliff Castle Casino because it was the only one. And then the casinos here in Prescott opened up, and then when Twin Arrows opened, it sort of took away some of our clientele. But we're still doing okay. But it's tough when you are the only game in town, and then you go to having competition right next door. It makes it a little bit harder. Yeah. Other questions? Anyone? No? All right. Thanks very much.
Let's give a big thank you to Maurice and an NHI hat.
Oh. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll keep the art gallery open. I think Maurice will hang out for a little bit
Sure.
if you have other
Yeah.
questions.
Great.
Thanks for joining us.